Could a single soldier, perched atop a burning vehicle, truly halt an entire armored assault? January 26, 1945. Holtzwihr, France. Inside a German aid station, a soldier from the 2nd Mountain Division watched numbly as medics dragged in the wounded. His unit, 250 men and 6 tanks, had just shattered itself against one lone American lieutenant. This single officer stood defiant on a burning tank destroyer, armed with just one machine gun. In less than an hour, the German attack force had evaporated, leaving only 70 effective soldiers. The survivors were haunted, speaking of nothing else but the weapon that had stopped them cold. This was not some secret wonder weapon, no technological marvel born in German laboratories. It was a simple American machine gun, one that first rolled off production lines back in 1933. Yet this weapon, the Browning M2.50 caliber, would soon become the most feared piece of equipment in the entire American arsenal. Its reputation was not built on complexity, but on its brutal, relentless, and unforgiving effectiveness. Those German survivors had just witnessed an engagement that would become a legend in American military history. First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, wounded and utterly alone, had climbed onto that burning M10 tank destroyer. He swung its turret-mounted .50 caliber machine gun toward the entire German infantry company and its supporting armor. For over an hour, Murphy unleashed a storm so devastating that the German attack simply disintegrated. The official Medal of Honor citation, awarded by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, would confirm the chilling tally. Approximately 50 casualties inflicted by that one gun. The wounds caused by .50 caliber impacts became grimly familiar to German medical personnel. Unlike a rifle round, which might wound and allow for recovery, these projectiles inflicted catastrophic tissue damage. The massive kinetic energy transfer meant that a hit to a limb was almost always a sentence for amputation. A hit to the torso was almost invariably fatal. German field hospitals near the front learned to recognize .50 caliber casualties by the sheer nature of their wounds. There was little the medics could do beyond offering comfort and attempting to stabilize the men for an evacuation many would never reach. This medical impact extended beyond the physical. German units that came under sustained .50 caliber fire suffered psychological casualties, combat exhaustion, and a breakdown of unit cohesion at rates far higher than units facing conventional small arms. Medical officers noted that soldiers subjected to these repeated attacks, even those left without a scratch, showed signs of severe stress. The terrifying knowledge that the next burst could not be survived by simply taking cover. The realization that luck, not skill, determined survival, created a sense of profound helplessness that was both medically and militarily significant. The Holtzwihr action was not an isolated incident. From the suffocating hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, from the searing deserts of North Africa to the skies over the Reich itself, German soldiers learned to identify and fear a distinctive sound. It was the deep rhythmic thunder of the M2 Browning, firing between 450 and 575 rounds per minute. Each massive .50 caliber round carried enough energy to punch through light armor, tear through concrete walls, and turn human bodies into unrecognizable wreckage. The transformation from skepticism to terror had begun 3 years earlier. The mathematics of American industrial might were about to be written, not in production statistics, but in the harrowing experience of German soldiers who faced this weapon and, by some miracle, survived. What they discovered would shatter their understanding of modern warfare. It revealed a profound truth about American military doctrine. The United States had not built the most sophisticated heavy machine gun. They had built something far more dangerous. They had built the most reliable, the most ubiquitous, and the most psychologically devastating crew-served weapon in history. This hatred did not begin with fear. It began with contempt. September 6, 1943. The skies over Stuttgart. A massive formation of 388 B-17 flying fortresses approached Germany's industrial heartland in the first major daylight raid on the city. Luftwaffe fighter units scrambled to intercept. Among them were veteran aces who had shot down dozens of Allied aircraft over 2 years of combat. They were supremely confident in their Focke-Wulf 190 aircraft, each armed with 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. The German pilots rolled into their attack runs from high and ahead, standard doctrine for dispatching the American heavies. At 800 meters, they opened fire. Cannons thundered, shells streaking toward the lead bombers. Then, something happened that would forever change the German understanding of air combat. The bombers erupted with fire, not the smoke of damaged aircraft, but the unmistakable flash of muzzles. Each B-17 carried 13 Browning M2 machine guns. A typical formation of 36 bombers meant 468 heavy machine guns, all firing the same .50 caliber cartridge that could reach out to 1,830 meters with lethal effect. The combined defensive firepower of the formation exceeded 6,000 rounds per minute, creating a literal wall of steel that no fighter could safely penetrate. German pilots felt their aircraft shudder as .50 caliber rounds tore into wings, engine cowlings, and canopies. They broke off their attacks, diving away with aircraft trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. The raid cost the Luftwaffe heavily. While 45 B-17s were lost, the German fighter losses were catastrophic for units that could no longer replace their experienced pilots. What the Germans did not yet grasp was that they were encountering not just a weapon, but a philosophy of warfare. The Americans had solved the problem of bomber defense not through technological sophistication, but through overwhelming, brutal volume of fire. Each B-17G carried between 5,000 and 7,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, distributed across those 13 gun positions, with some crews adding even more beyond regulations. Luftwaffe pilots had been trained to respect 20mm and 30mm cannons, weapons that could destroy a bomber with a single, well-placed, explosive shot. But the American 50 caliber did not explode. It didn't need to. The massive half-inch projectile, weighing 707 grains and traveling at 2,900 feet per second, carried 12,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. It simply punched holes in everything it touched: wings, engines, fuel tanks, and pilots. By October 1943, Luftwaffe fighter units had begun to understand the true danger. Oberleutnant Heinrich Wurmhela, an ace with 93 victories, described the American formations in a letter home. To attack the Americans is to fly through a storm of steel. You see the tracers, 1 round in 5, and you know that for every tracer you see, 4 more bullets you cannot see are flying past. When you close to effective cannon range, you are already inside their killing zone. The Germans adapted. They tried head-on attacks, diving from above, climbing from below, attacking from the sides. Nothing worked consistently. The American gunners had overlapping fields of fire. Come from ahead, the nose guns and top turret would engage. From behind, the tail guns and ball turret. From the sides, the waist guns. From above or below, the ball and top turrets. There was no safe approach. The United States Army Air Forces had arranged their combat box formations of 18 to 21 aircraft in three-dimensional space, specifically to maximize this overlapping defensive fire. But the real horror was not just the volume. It was the reliability. German pilots flying the Me-109 or FW-190 knew their advanced cannons were prone to jamming, especially in the freezing cold of high altitude. The German MG-131 machine gun was better, but it still required careful maintenance and would fail at critical moments. The American Browning M2, by contrast, simply worked. It fired continuously for hours. It operated in temperatures from -40 to +40 Celsius. It functioned even after being hit by German cannon fire. It kept shooting, even when the barrels glowed red from sustained bursts. American maintenance crews could replace overheated barrels in minutes, not hours, and the gun would resume firing without missing a beat. Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer, a Ju-88 pilot who flew intercept missions, survived to give testimony at post-war debriefings. His words, recorded in March 1946, captured the growing realization. We called the American bomber formations Die Fliegenden Festungen, the flying fortresses. But what made them true fortresses was not their armor. It was those .50 caliber machine guns that never stopped firing, never jammed, never gave us an opening. We lost so many pilots, not to American fighters, but to the bomber defensive fire. It was like flying into a meat grinder. The ground war told the exact same story, with different details. June 6, 1944, Normandy. Oberst Hans von Luck commanded elements of the 21st Panzer Division. Von Luck was no ordinary officer. He had fought at El Alamein and earned the Knight's Cross. His division was among the first to encounter American forces in sustained ground combat. What he discovered was that American doctrine had placed the .50 caliber machine gun on virtually every combat vehicle. Jeeps mounted them, trucks mounted them, half-tracks mounted them, tanks mounted them on turret roofs, even supply vehicles carried them. The Americans had achieved something the Germans had never even attempted: universal heavy machine gun coverage across their entire force structure. Von Luck wrote in his memoir about the tactical implications. We had been told our training and our tactical doctrine would overcome American material advantage. At Normandy, I learned the truth. The Americans did not need superior tactics. They had enough ammunition to make mistakes and still win. Their .50 caliber machine guns were on every vehicle, every position, firing continuously. We could not move in daylight. Any attempt to maneuver drew immediate and overwhelming fire. The psychological effect was as destructive as the physical casualties. The German army had built its infantry doctrine around the machine gun. The MG-34 and its successor, the MG-42, were excellent, revolutionary weapons. The MG-42, firing at 1,200 rounds per minute, earned the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw. German squads organized their tactics around supporting that gun. But the Germans had never imagined the sheer scale of American .50 caliber employment. A single American armored division advancing through France would have hundreds of them. American supply convoys used a documented pattern of alternating fire, one vehicle shooting right, the next shooting left, to break up ambushes. Armored columns employed reconnaissance by fire. Rather than carefully advancing, American units would fire their .50 calibers continuously into any suspicious location: tree lines, farm buildings, stone walls. The volume of fire would either suppress hidden positions or provoke return fire that revealed their locations. This tactic drove German soldiers to distraction. Veterans of the Eastern Front thought they had seen the worst of industrial warfare against the Soviets. Then they met American firepower in France. German squad leaders captured in Normandy described the difference in their debriefings. Against the Russians, we faced human wave attacks and artillery. Against the Americans, we faced machine gun fire that never stopped. They fired at everything. They fired at nothing. They fired to make us keep our heads down. They fired to prevent us from moving. They fired because they had unlimited ammunition, and we did not. After 2 weeks in the hedgerows, German soldiers would not leave cover during daylight. It was not cowardice. It was mathematics. Movement meant death. The M16 multiple gun motor carriage demonstrated this philosophy at its most extreme. This was a half-track mounting 4.50 caliber machine guns in a powered turret. Its combined rate of fire approached 2,200 rounds per minute. American soldiers called it the meat chopper. By late 1944, with the Luftwaffe largely defeated, these anti-aircraft units were repurposed for ground support. The M16 proved devastating. During the Battle of the Bulge, M16 units were credited with breaking up numerous German infantry attacks, simply by traversing their four-gun mounts across the advancing formations. The experience of German forces attempting to ambush American convoys illustrates the hatred for the .50 caliber. German doctrine called for letting the lead vehicles pass, destroying the middle of the column to create a roadblock, then systematically destroying the trapped vehicles. This had worked effectively against British and Soviet supply lines. Against American convoys, the tactic failed catastrophically. The .50 caliber armed vehicles distributed throughout the column would immediately bombard return fire. The volume was so intense that German ambush teams frequently suffered heavier casualties than the convoys they attacked. German platoon leaders described the failure in post-war interrogations. They learned to only ambush isolated vehicles, but isolated vehicles were rare. The Americans moved in strength. The alternating fire pattern was particularly effective, creating intersecting fields of fire that covered both sides of the road simultaneously. An ambush team on one side would find themselves under fire from the opposite side of the convoy as well. The psychological effect of being attacked from multiple directions by weapons that could penetrate cover, with seemingly unlimited ammunition, made successful ambushes nearly impossible. This had strategic implications. German forces in France could not effectively interrupt American logistics. American units could assume they would have ammunition, fuel, and food. German planning, by contrast, had to account for chronic shortages. The .50 caliber was both a cause and a symptom of this logistical superiority. It was effective because American industry could produce ammunition in vast quantities, and it enabled continued operations because its reliability meant that ammunition, once delivered, would be effectively employed. German soldiers watching American tracer fire arc across the night sky understood they were seeing not just ammunition, but the visible proof of an industrial capacity they could not hope to match. The terror from the air added another dimension. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, nicknamed the Jug, carried 8 Browning M2s in its wings. This meant a single fighter could deliver 4,400 rounds per minute during a strafing run. German ground forces learned to recognize the P-47's shape and the sound that preceded death. A strafing run by a flight of 4 P-47s meant 32 heavy machine guns converging on a target. Survivors described it as a horizontal rainstorm of metal that left nothing intact. A German supply sergeant captured during the retreat from Normandy described the helplessness. You hear the engines? By the time you look up, they are already firing. The bullets hit the road, the vehicles, the men, all at once. There is no cover that works. Stone walls crumble. Trees are cut down. Metal tears like paper. Soldiers learned to abandon vehicles the moment they heard aircraft engines. The P-47s proved particularly effective in armed reconnaissance missions, patrolling sectors and hunting targets of opportunity. Any German vehicle moving in daylight risked a tack. With 3,400 rounds on board, a single pilot could engage multiple targets on one flight. German forces adapted by moving only at night or in bad weather, but this came at an enormous cost to their operational tempo. Supplies that should have taken hours required days. The combination of ground-mounted and air-delivered .50 caliber fire created a comprehensive suppression effect. German units could not move safely in daylight because of strafing. They could not move safely at night because American ground forces used reconnaissance by fire to interdict the roads. They could not concentrate for counterattacks because any identified formation would be met with immediate, overwhelming fire. This was the reality that broke German combat effectiveness in the West. It wasn't a single battle or a wonder weapon. It was the cumulative weight of facing an opponent whose basic heavy machine gun was present in such overwhelming quantities and employed so lavishly that traditional military responses became irrelevant. German tactics, German training, German fighting spirit, none of it could overcome the simple mathematical reality. Urban combat revealed yet another dimension. The .50 caliber's massive projectile could penetrate multiple walls of typical European construction. Masonry that stopped rifle fire offered no protection. American tank commanders learned to use their turret-mounted .50 calls to suppress upper-story windows before moving through a street. The tank would halt, the commander would traverse the gun across building facades, and the sustained fire would force defenders to take cover, allowing infantry to advance. German Panzerfaust teams, so dangerous in close quarters, found themselves unable to function. The operator needed to expose himself to fire, but American doctrine called for continuous .50 caliber fire on any suspected position. German company commanders described the impossibility of urban defense. German infantry would position in upper-story rooms. American tanks would approach and destroy the buildings with .50 caliber fire. The rounds would penetrate walls and ceilings. There was no safe place. The only way to survive was to abandon positions. This psychological erosion was cumulative. A soldier might survive one engagement, watching .50 caliber rounds punch through a meter-thick stone wall. But the accumulated stress of knowing no position was truly safe eventually broke combat effectiveness. Units would abandon positions without even being directly assaulted. Night combat introduced its own terror. American ammunition used a 1-in-4 tracer ratio. Every fifth .50 caliber bullet was a glowing streak marking the burst's trajectory. German soldiers could see the traces arcing toward them, streaks of light that seemed to move slowly, but arrived with devastating speed. They could see death approaching. They knew for every tracer they saw, 4 more invisible rounds were flying along the same path. Veterans learned not to watch, but new replacements would fixate on the deadly light show, often freezing in the open until the fire found them. American forces exploited this deliberately. Reconnaissance by fire at night lit up entire sectors with intersecting streams of tracers. The noise, combined with the visual impact, created an environment German soldiers described as hellish. An infantry squad leader captured near Aachen explained the terrifying mathematics. You see 10 streaks of light and no 40 more rounds are in the air. Then you realize there are not 1 but 10 guns firing. You cannot survive that volume of fire by skill or courage. You survive by luck alone. The Germans had tracers, but their doctrine of fire discipline meant they were used sparingly. The Americans fired mixed belts continuously, giving them a visual dominance that also served as real-time feedback to adjust their aim. The Germans tried to counter. They tried aggressive armor tactics, but were broken up by artillery and air support before the .50 calibers finished the job. They tried infiltration, but American doctrine encouraged firing at any suspected position, confirmed or not. July 25th, 1944, Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy. General Major Fritz Bayerlein of the Panzer Lehr Division wrote extensive post-war analyses. He stated his elite division was decimated not primarily by bombs, but by the cumulative effect of constant small arms fire that prevented any effective maneuver. His conclusion was clinical. The Americans had solved the fundamental problem of modern warfare. They had found a way to project superior firepower without requiring superior training or tactics. The winter of 1944 brought the Battle of the Bulge. German forces achieved complete surprise. It seemed their armor might break through. Then, American logistics reasserted itself, and with it, the .50 caliber. American units rushed to the Ardennes, their weapons operating reliably despite the mud, snow, and below-freezing temperatures. German planners had assumed bad weather would ground American air power, and they were right. But they fatally underestimated the volume of ground-mounted .50 caliber fire that was completely unaffected by the weather. General der Fallschirmtruppe, Alfred Schlemm, commanding the 1st Parachute Army, noted in his post-war analysis that by early 1945, his soldiers had learned to recognize the sound of the .50 caliber at great distances. The knowledge that any position could be engaged by these weapons created what he called a defensive mentality that made offensive operations psychologically impossible. The M2's technical specifications explain its effectiveness. It was heavy, but its 1,830-meter effective range outdistanced German rifles. Its rate of fire was slower than the MG-42, but that meant nothing when German crews had to conserve every bullet. The .50 caliber cartridge, ball, armor-piercing, incendiary, could destroy trucks, puncture fuel tanks, disable artillery, and penetrate the side and rear armor of many German vehicles. The design itself, finalized in 1933, was simple and robust. Nearly 2 million .50 caliber machine guns were produced during the war. This scale meant American forces never lacked for replacements or spare parts. The Germans understood intellectually what they faced. Their weapons were, in many respects, more sophisticated. But sophistication meant nothing in the face of overwhelming material superiority. The Americans had built a weapon that was good enough for every role, and had produced it in quantities that allowed for universal employment. Every bomber, every fighter, every tank, every truck, every infantry company had one. The weapon was everywhere, always supplied, and it worked every time.